Thank you. So thank you for inviting me talking here today in the Lies and Lies. Actually, I'm not going to talk about deception appropriately because it is not really the core of my research. I'm going to present a study we made with Magali Ginet, which is a professor of psychology in France, and Nadine Deslauriers-Varin, which is professor of criminology in Quebec, and we studied the risk of false confession within the cognitive interview for suspects protocol, which is an interview method designed to increase the number of correct information gathered in a suspect interview, but also to limit the possibility of the suspect to lie and to increase the ability for the interviewer to detect deception. So first, the false confession can be defined as a detailed admission to a critical act, so to us a criminal act, that the confessor actually did not commit. So here's the general definition for false confession, but actually there are three kinds of false confession. With the first one is the compliant false confession, where the suspect says simply, yes, I did it, I am the person who committed the crime, for example. But here in the compliant false confession, the person does not have to be sure that he or she is really responsible for the crime. So it can be a person who says, yes, I did it, but actually believes or does not believe that he or she is responsible. The second one is the internalized false confession, when the person is sure he or she did commit the crime. So he or she says, yes, I'm sure I did it, but actually there is no need for the person to remember it. So maybe you can have confessions like, yes, I think I am the one who committed the crime, but actually I can't remember, maybe I was drunk, maybe I have a memory loss, but actually I'm sure I am the one who committed it. And then we have the third type of false confession, which is the confabulated false confession. And this one is actually an internalized false confession, but in which the person adds some confabulated details which did not occur. Like, for example, yes, I remember I did commit the crime, I took the weapon in my bag and shot the person, but actually this never happened. So the question first is, why do false confessions occur? There are a lot of research upon the topic of false confession, and the researches show that there are two families of causes. The first one is the individual causes. For example, the voluntary false confession, so when the person wants to be designed as the guilty person, maybe because she wants to protect someone, for example, or to go to prison. There is a reason for the suggestibility, like, for example, really young person, also person who has memory losses or problems, and also person, for example, who has mental disabilities, and so on. So mostly individual reasons to explain false confession. And the second family of reasons is the external causes. So here we find, for example, pressures like gang pressures or family pressures, for example, to confess, and also interrogation tactics used to interview the person. For example, a study made in 1996 by Sigurdsson and Gudjonsson had for objective to interview some false confessor. So they went to see people who claimed that they had made a false confession, so claimed they were actually innocent, confessed and went to prison, and asked them why did you make false confession. And the reason given sometimes by this person, who were mostly young males, was that they wanted to avoid the pressures and the emotional distress felt in the interrogation room and within the custody, and mostly interrogation tactics used by the interviewers led them to make false confession. Actually, in the field, it is hard to know what is a real confession and a false confession, because we can never be 100% sure that a confession is true or false. But there are laboratory studies that have been designed to study this phenomenon. And for example, in 1996, Cassin and Kishel designed the Forbidden Key protocol to study the phenomenon of false confession. So I'm just going to describe a little how this protocol works. So first, the participant is, for example, a student of the university or anybody voluntary to participate to the study. This person is asked to do a classic computer language task. So the person is given a computer and listens to a list of letters and has to type down all the letters he or she hears. So here is the classic really language task. And just before the experiment begins, the experimenter gives an inquiry to the participants and asks he or she to absolutely not press the Alt key, because if they do so, it would cause the computer to crash and all the data to be lost. So the participant does the task, and of course, after 2 or 3 minutes, the computer actually crashes, and the participant is then accused of being responsible of this crash, so have hidden the Alt key, and then is interviewed by another experimenter or an interviewer, in order to test the possibility that a false confession can or can't occur. Actually, here the experimenter knows that the person is not responsible for the crash, because the computer crash is actually programmed by advance, and all the participants leave this situation. So there is a meta-analysis conducted in 2014 with 14 studies, which had for aim to test the impact of interview methods on the occurrence of false confession. Mostly, the studies compared two kinds of methods, which were information gathering methods, so cooperative methods centered on information gathering, where the suspect is mostly treated like a witness, and coercive methods, where the interview is focused on obtaining, for example, a confession, where the suspect is mainly treated like a guilty person. And the results of these studies and this meta-analysis is that we found, of course, more false confession with coercive techniques. So in these techniques, you can find, for example, the direct aggressive techniques, like using a threatening voice and a threatening body language, and maximization techniques. Also, softly coercive methods like minimization, deal offer, and blaming the victim in order to obtain a confession. Also, manipulative techniques such as lying about false evidence and false testimonies that the interviewers have against the person. And also pressure increasing methods such as provoking isolation and emotional distress, voluntary or non-voluntary emotional distress within the interview. So here comes the core of our study, which was the cognitive interview for suspects, which is a kindly new interview method created in 2012 by Geiselman. And this method has for aim to gather a high quantity of information during the interview, but also to prevent the person from lying and to help the interviewer detecting deception. So this protocol is an information gathering method, so a priori there is no risk for false confession. But there are also components which are designed to increase cognitive load and to provoke difficulties within the statements of the person. So here the question was, is there any risk of false confession within this protocol? For example, these components are in particular the reverse order recall. So when the person tells the story in the contrary chronological order, and the challenge stage, which can be defined also as the tactical interview described by Dando and Bull in 2011, when the person, the interviewer, presents gradually the material evidences against the person and asks for explanation. Our objective was to test if the CIS would increase the number of false confession by using the forbidden key protocol. So here were our results. So here you can see the numbers of false confession, so the compliant, the internalized, and the confabulated false confession. And we can see that we compared the CIS with an IGM, which means a controlled information gathering method, and an AI, which means an accusatorial interview. First, we replicated the interior data with a high number of false confession within the accusatorial interviews. So 21, for example, false compliant confession, 4 internalized false confession, and 2 confabulated false confession. And the results for the CIS were only 1 false confession with the CIS protocol, which is higher than 0, of course, but here in particular the false confession occurred at the early beginning of the interview, so it was more an individual cause false confession more than the interview techniques caused false confession. So we were happy that the CIS did not increase the risk of false confession. And after we tested for the number of information we gathered with each interview style, and we saw that with the CIS we gathered more information, like for example more action details compared to the information gathering method and the accusatorial interview. So here is the main results of my study, of our study, and I'm coming to the end of this presentation. I just wanted to conclude with the sentence that if we want to create new method, new lie detection techniques, information gathering techniques, I think, and we think that we should test if there is a risk for false confession who can draw to dramatic conclusions. Thank you very much for your listening, and I'm looking forward for your questions also.